Hey dudes, SilviteSoltis here, back with another video for you. As you know if you watched my most recent video, I've been on a bit of a hiatus for the past 4 years. Though I did stop making videos, I did continue to play WoW Classic for a while beyond July 2020. All good things come to an end, however, and I eventually drifted away from the game. And while many others cite things like the developers being out of touch, Blizzard scandals, and the WoW token as their reasons for stepping away, my decision was a bit more personal. So, as a sort of welcome back to YouTube for myself, I thought I should take the time today to tell you another story. The story of how and why I stepped away from WoW Classic. Shortly after Classic launched, I joined a guild on Mancrik US that would become known as Exodus. It had a simple one-night-a-week raiding schedule that worked for my unique situation. Remember that at the time I was living in Mongolia, and my wife had, and really still has, an extremely negative impression of World of Warcraft. Raids were on Sunday mornings from around 6 to 9 a.m. my time, which was really the only time I could get away to play. We progressed through Molten Core and Blackwing Lair, though the latter definitely proved a bit challenging for us. You see, our guild had a very casual mindset of only one mandatory raid per week, so progress was quite slow. By the time BWL was on farm, about half the guild did not want to go back to Molten Core for any reason, so we began having trouble farming the remaining loot for teammates, such as the bindings for our tank. Eventually, leadership began fracturing, and in the summer of 2020, I ended up becoming the healer officer, in charge of healing assignments, and thus in AQ, the loot assignments for our healers. Well, shortly after Phase 5 launched in July of 2020, the gates of Anchorage opened on Mancrik. Our guild was excited to start, but we lost momentum very quickly thereafter. We progressed through the first two bosses easily enough, but from Sartura onward we slowed down quite a bit. By this time we were having trouble maintaining a full roster, typically only having about 36 to 39 players online for raid each week, and at least 1 or 2 new trials every time. Despite these issues, we did push forward and eventually succeeded in killing Princess Huhuran on September 9th. This was our final progression kill as a guild though. The Twin Emperors were too much for our incomplete revolving door of a guild roster. Exodus disbanded shortly thereafter. Some of our team quit the game. Others joined different guilds. I, however, decided to take a break from raiding. I was quite burnt out of AQ at this point, and my wife was tired of me constantly being online. After all, as a healing officer, I had been putting in a lot of effort to set up my team, recruiting new healers to replace the ones that were leaving, setting up assignments, and chatting with members on Discord. Really, she and I were both just kind of done with it. I did pug a few times to make sure that I got to see Cthulhu, but I didn't join a new team for a while. And then, Naxxramas released. When Phase 6 launched and Naxxramas released, I had been full-on casual for about 3 months, and was fully content to remain that way. I completed all the goals I had set out to do, collecting full Tier 1 and Tier 2 sets on my Priest, completing my Dungeon Set 2 questline on my Paladin, and even fully clearing AQ40 with some high-parsing soft reserve pug loops. If I wanted to raid Nax, I'd need to find a new guild, farm gold, prepare consumables, get world buffs constantly, and generally spend more time than ever playing. Something that my wife did not want me to do. It definitely wasn't worth the headache. At least, that's what I told myself on release. So for about a month or so, I watched as players in Orgrimmar and Ironforge began slowly building their Tier 3 sets over the holiday season. And with every passing week, the itch became stronger and stronger. Eventually, I'd had enough. I convinced myself, and my wife, that this would be the last hurrah. I needed to give it a go. After all, it was the final raid of Classic. And so, in early January of 2021, I found a new guild to call home. Dragonite of Mancrik was your typical casual dad guild. They raided 2 nights a week, Friday and Saturday, if I remember correctly, and didn't require any crazy flasking or world buffs. Just encouraged getting whatever you could. When I joined, they were sitting at around 4 or 5 out of 15 in Nax. There was plenty of time left before TBC to wrap things up, and I figured that it would be a good team to finish things off with. Every week we progressed a little bit further into the necropolis before getting stuck on a new challenge. 5 out of 15 became 7 out of 15, then 9 out of 15, and finally 11 out of 15, 5 weeks after I joined. Believe it or not, one of our hardest bosses was Gothic the Harvester, who toyed with our split raid team for quite a while before we finally took him down. But even though we were making progress, it was definitely slow going, and I began to feel the burnout creeping back in. I had been raiding with Dragonite for 8 weeks, and there had been no new progress since Gothic. 2 bosses still stood in our way before we'd even be able to start working on the final wing, and we'd been focusing almost exclusively on the 4 horsemen for the past 3 weeks of progress, hardly even touching Loetheb. By this point, I just wanted to get that KT kill and call it a day. And so, considering how demotivated the team was getting, and how frustrated both my wife and I were that I couldn't just put the whole thing to bed, I made a decision to jump ship. Being in Mongolia, my options for raiding guilds that had Nax on farm, were recruiting healers, and matched my schedule were quite limited. Through poking around Warcraft logs and forum recruitment posts, however, I managed to find a Singaporean guild on Remulos called Milk Puff that was willing to take me in. So, after finishing up my weekly raid with Dragonite on February 21st, I transferred servers and joined my new and final raid team. My first night with Milk Puff was like night and day. We breezed through every single fight, one-shotting everything and clearing up through Gothic in just under 3 hours of casual play. I finally got to see Loetheb fall, and even picked up an off-spec hat for DPS. After nearly 2 months of Naxxramas, the end of Classic was in my sights. The next night, we arrived at 9:30 sharp and cleared the trash up to the 4 horsemen. Like the gears of a well-oiled machine, the players rotated around to topple each target. The horsemen fell with ease, and we made our way up to the Frostworm lair. After a few minutes of explaining positions, we watched the bones swirl around and began the fight with Sapphiron. Unfortunately for me, and about 6 others in my area, Saf decided to send all his ice blocks to the opposite side of the room during one of the air phases. So a bunch of us were insta-gibbed as we scrambled across the room. Luckily, the rest of the team made up for us, and the boss fell. Now only one boss remained, Kel'Thuzad himself. I'd like to say that we rocked up and one-shot KT, but it was actually not that easy. After explaining positioning, and everyone getting ready, we ended up wiping when, of course, a hunter pet ran into one of the ad corners in Phase 1 and wiped the raid. We ran back, ported to Orgrimmar, and got a few world buffs before heading back to face the Lich. This time, everything went like clockwork, and the final boss of Naxxramas fell in front of my Troll Priest's eyes. We'd done it. We'd cleared Naxxramas. A feeling of serene wonder washed over me, and while the Milk Puff team had beaten KT many times before, and would do it again many times after, I was fully satisfied. I had beaten WoW Classic. I was done. After killing Kel'Thuzad, I fully stepped away from Classic for a while, and focused instead on my work and family. I knew I would play again in the Burning Crusade Classic, but since I had already experienced nearly all TBC content back in 2007 to 2008, I planned to keep it casual, maining my Dwarf Paladin, and only doing some Tier 4 content and heroic dungeons. All in all, it was a good time. However, my life took an unexpected turn when in September 2021, my father passed away unexpectedly. Initially, I got even more degenerate, playing secretly and using heroic dungeon spam into the late hours as a sort of coping mechanism. But as my 6-month subscription approached its end, I realized that I had no real goals left in the game. With no purpose and a grieving heart, I decided to say goodbye to Classic and focus on my real life for a while. After losing my father, my wife and I finally solidified our decision to relocate to the United States in order to be closer with my remaining family, as well as to improve our kids' living environment. Thus, from November 2021 until the following summer, I began focusing on that goal instead. And while I have occasionally signed up for a month of WoW here or there to check out the changes to Classic, I have more or less been away ever since. So, there you have it, the story of how I finished my WoW Classic journey. Overall, it was a great experience that I'm very happy to have had. That said, I can't help but feel a little bit guilty to my old guildmates for the way I achieved my goals. To anyone from Dragonite or Milkpuff, I am very sorry for dipping out, but I genuinely appreciate the times we shared. You guys are all awesome, and I hope that you had fun in the Burning Crusade and beyond. But anyway, yeah, that pretty much wraps it up for me today. Classic was an awesome time, and I hope that we'll be able to experience something like it again someday. That said, there's lots of other games that I'd like to talk about, so keep an eye out for the next video. But until then, and as always, take it easy, guys.